just make so much money that your expenses just don't matter. There's a limit to like how much you can cut expenses, but there's no limit, especially in the age of the internet, how much money you can make. Take care of yourself like an Olympic athlete. You have one body, one mind. Like everything that you ever experience or feel or think, like it's going to take place in your mind.
Hmm.
And you really have to take care of that. I'm an optimist, but like I think we're going to get over that. We're going to start listening to each other. What's next? And I
Hmm.
think next is space, like exploration, getting out there and just like exploring like the goddamn galaxy.
My followers are a pretty smart group, and one of them, a new friend of mine, Dan Heiser, he contacted me for an interview for his doctoral program. I had to do an oral history with an entrepreneur, and I said yes because frankly, it felt good to be asked. I guess he couldn't get Alex Hormozi, but I felt this would be perfect for a YouTube video as well because, odds are, like if you're in business, if you like, reading business books, like career development books, you might be a few steps behind me, but you're probably 100 steps behind someone like Alex Hormozi. And I am maybe a few steps ahead of you, but I'm also like 95 steps behind him. Like you don't go to Bill Gates to ask him about how to build a website. I've done a lot in business over the last few years, and this is my full-time thing. I mean, I've got like a dozen different revenue streams, a legitimate business, 100,000 followers on Instagram, all these things that I do, business systems and structures in place. So in this video, Dan and I talk about achieving success in the creator economy, how I make decisions with my business and personally, where I think online business and social media is going in general, and obviously I mention a ton of books as well because I can't not talk about books. So you'll get a ton of good book recommendations here as well. So here's the full interview. It's about an hour long. Let me know if you have any additional questions. I'll answer them in the comments. And like and share this video with a friend of yours if you found it valuable and if you think that someone else would like it as well.
To start this off, Matt, why don't you go ahead and tell us what is it you actually do?
Sure. My business is primarily online, I hate the word influencer. I don't use it myself, but that's sort of a simple way of conceptualizing it. Authors basically come to me to get them to get me to share their books with my audience. So I've got an audience on Instagram. It's about 100,000 strong right now, and YouTube, which I'm just sort of getting off the ground, and Twitter, which I'm actually loving because it's like an entire business education just on one free social media platform. It's insane. So I'm there too. I'm all over the place, but that's basically what I do. And I mean, we'll talk more as a lot of these questions will sort of let me fill in some blanks here. But yeah, I bring books to the people.
Excellent. I love it. Honestly, I've been following it for a while, and it has been a journey and a half.
Right on.
So to start off, we know as the economy grows, economic change and everything changes in the economy with every single passing day. My first question to you is how is it you would say that you've adapted to the market really to remain relevant and go with the flow?
Mm. Well, social media moves even faster, I think, than most businesses. And I mean, there's like if you're not sort of taking advantage of that, if you're not sort of in the fray, you're really falling behind in the modern business landscape, basically. So it moves faster than it ever did before. And even in social media in the last 10 years, I think it's ramping up the creativity and just the sheer volume of people doing amazing work and just like sort of raising that bar for all of us. And I sort of think of it like there's a book by Matt Ridley called The Red Queen, and it's about evolution basically. But he'll talk about like evolutionary strategies, like reproductive strategies, survival strategies. Like one, like say the males of the species would find out some way to sort of become more attractive or sort of pull one over on like the female of the species, right? And then the female of the species or whatever would have to sort of get a defense to that and sort of come back and sort of this upward spiral, right? And social media is kind of the same thing. So you see, like from my own sort of perspective, I see other people that are in my sort of niche
Mm-hmm.
and books. They're always sort of innovating and sort of building upon what they've done before. and just getting better over time. And I have to step up and I have to sort of stay relevant. And you sort of have to look at what's working and what they're doing. Like the biggest players of like and what like you'll find that they're all doing similar things. I'll notice like a similar type of video content or video style that's really popular. So I'll have to sort of incorporate that or see what's working about that and add it to my own. And it sort of helps to have other people's eyes on things too, and sort of sort of watch the landscape for you and sort of help you notice things that you're not seeing yourself. Always good to get other viewpoints.
So yeah, going off of what you just said about the competition, essentially,
Mm.
how would you say that you're actually like? Is it the research you're doing, or is it the seeing what others are doing and then mimicking it, or what are you doing to stylize your own?
Yeah, there's a technique. It's some people call it the skyscraper technique, right? Which I found it really helpful. So you take something that's popular or done or something that's done well, something that you really like, and then you try to build upon it, sort of make it
Mhm.
even better. Take what they've done and say they use that like some sort of editing style, or they incorporate something into their content, I guess you could call it, and you figure out how to do it even better. So you like build the skyscraper even taller, and it's sort of like there's some pretty tall skyscrapers now. People just like really insanely creative, hardworking people making these incredible things, and like, all right, great. How do I beat that? you know.
How do I one up
So
them?
yeah, yeah,
Okay. So, looking at applied economics now, this is a
sure.
process of telling the history of economics with statistics and mathematics. So, when first building your own business, how did you actually apply economics to design your strategy to be successful, bouncing off of what we just discussed?
Sure. One of the things that I've come to appreciate the power of is the total addressable market, and how important that is to sort of stress test your ideas. So like if you have a local restaurant, everyone who eats at that restaurant has to be local, right? Your total addressable market is just people in that vicinity, which is fine. I mean, you can build fine living just by having a restaurant with a small total addressable market, or clothing store, like something local, right? But if like something that I wanted to do, I needed to have like a much larger total addressable market. So, you look at people who read, which is a lot less or a lot smaller than the total market of consumers. Because I
Mhm.
mean, lots of people hate reading. They just don't have time for it. They don't
I
like
am
it.
not one
Don't
of
see the
them.
value of it. You know, and so it's your market isn't everybody,
Yeah.
and total addressable market is how many people you can actually reach. So there are plenty of people who love to read, but they don't speak English, right? So like I wouldn't be able to address them, because even if they saw one of my videos or saw one of my posts, they wouldn't speak English, right? They're not part of my market. So I had to really sort of figure out my TAM or TAM, and I did find that it was big enough to sustain something like this. But I think what's also important is you find someone who's already doing something that you're doing. Like if nobody else in the entire world is doing what you're thinking of doing, there might be a reason for that.
Mm.
And you have to sort of be careful of that. And I think that's a trap that a lot of people fall into. It's like they want this like completely totally original idea that nobody's ever done before, but the reason that nobody's ever done it before is it's a bad idea, right? Nobody wants it.
There's not
So
that market for it.
yeah, exactly,
But
exactly.
I do feel like you do have a rather unique concept going for yourself. I mean, your business focuses not just on books, but fitness and helping others. And that's besides that, but it's achieving things. So, going off of that, your business is different, it's unique. So, what is it that you're taking into consideration when creating a company like this? Like, what did you actually study to build the model and put it into action?
Sure. Uh, a lot of it was just sort of following my own curiosity, and I've always been a big believer in people. Like I'm a believer in people and a supporter of people as well. And some people go through their entire lives without ever anyone ever telling them that they can become more than they are, or do or move forward in life, whatever that looks like for them, right? And to be sort of a supportive voice for people as much as I can, I love doing that. And to match like the perfect book with the perfect person at the perfect time, it lights me up, right? One book in particular that sort of set me off on this path here. It's from Scott Adams, the cartoonist, and
Mhm.
it's called oh man, it's called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big.
I've read that. I love that book.
You have, right? And he's such an interesting dude. I mean, he's like he was in corporate America for decades, and then he's got this insanely successful cartoon. He's a restaurateur, investor, doing a whole bunch of the cool things. And so one of the things that he says in that book is that, he finds, like, instead of trying to be the top 1% in one thing, which is exceptionally hard to do. I mean, you're trying to be the best in the world at this one thing. You're going to face a lot of like really stiff competition,
Mhm.
right? So, and he was never good enough at anything to be like top 1%. But, if you can be in like the top 10% of two different things and combine them, that's where he sort of found his special niche, I guess. So the way he said it in the book, he's like, there are lots of people who are funnier than I am, but I'm pretty funny, and there are also lots of people who are much better cartoonists or artists, better at drawing than I am, but I'm pretty damn good at that. So he was in like top 10%, or better, whoever, in those two things, and you combine them to be something exceptionally, just something exceptional, right? And there's another great book, really fast, quick read by Seth Godin. It's called Purple Cow,
Hmm.
and one of the things that he talks about is just the importance of being remarkable. Like there's someone who's like top 1% in fitness or academia. That is remarkable, right? But it's like there's lots of people who are really good at those things, right? But you have like a mix of someone who combines like books and fitness, right? That is remarkable. That's like seeing a purple cow. And you know, and there's another saying, I forget who said this, maybe it was Naval Ravikant. He's like, marketing is the tax that you pay for being unremarkable. So I've always sort of kept that in mind too.
I love it. That's actually kind of related to what the next thing that goes into it. So, looking at people like Olive Ann Beach, who's known as the First Lady of Aviation, Ray Kroc, who we all know created the McDonald's franchise, and Walt Disney, for crying out loud, who created the world's largest media and entertainment business. Going off of those three, what is it that you want to be known for?
Mhm. First, a book recommendation. Speaking of women in aviation, this is maybe last year or year before, I read The Fun of It by Amelia Earhart, and it's her autobiography.
I didn't know she wrote a book.
Yeah,
I'm
The
actually
Fun of
writing
It.
that down.
Oh yeah, it is really, really good. It's both the earliest years of aviation. Like she was like literally flying across the Atlantic, trying to hold the map like onto her dress because it was gonna fly away. Like she's like it's wild. And it's just a whole bunch of stuff like that. She's also hilarious, and like the book is great because it's like her story of entering this field that like nobody
No
thought she could
woman could do.
exactly right, and then she just like tears the roof off the whole thing.
And then
Anyway,
she
so
goes
that's
missing.
my book recommendation. But back to your question, what like I want to be known for, you know, I, the short answer is nothing. But not because it wouldn't be nice. I don't think that it's like it doesn't mean much to me to be like known for something. I sort of I take this from Alex Hormozi when he had this post a little while ago, and he said that the Queen died 5 months ago, right?
Mhm.
She was queen, like ruler over an entire empire, like obviously wealthy and adored by millions and like hundreds of millions of people, right? And you didn't think of her until I made this post. She's been dead
Uh,
for 5 months. We forgot about her, like
some
and
have.
like
I'll admit I
right,
wasn't.
exactly. Some people absolutely have not forgotten about her, and I think she was a pretty cool lady,
Oh, she was
personally.
awesome.
Um, but I mean, that's sort of like if you can forget about like the one of the most well-known popular people in all of history within 5 months and just sort of go about your business,
Hmm.
it sort of calls into question like how worthy of a goal it is to sort of be remembered by
Yeah.
people. Um, that being said, like there are like personal interactions between people that they will remember. The one-on-one thing, that they'll remember for a long time. Me and them, and maybe not like the mass of people will remember me for something, but that person that, I shared a book recommendation with, or a favorite quote, or, some fitness tip that they implement and it changes everything for them, like they're going to remember that. And I'm going to remember helping them, with that and like how that made me feel. And, I can do that every single day, and like I feel good about that as opposed to sort of having a bunch of faceless people know who I am. Right.
Oh yeah,
So,
excellent. I love it. So, going a little bit back to Disney, in 1959, Wall Street Journal analyzed his company's like the actual exponential growth, concluding that the formula was dream, diversity, and never missing an angle. That being said, how is it that you can implement this formula into your own business practice?
mm. I see that I've always seen the value of thinking really big and just sort of taking these like giant moonshots and like sort of thinking like much bigger, right? Even if like you know you sort of you come up with something that it probably won't work, but you're thinking much bigger than uh like
You're
the way I'd
thinking
put
too
it, like
far out of the box instead of the small, right?
right, and it's like it sort of helps you sort of like actually land something bigger than you would have if you hadn't thought big in the first place. So
Okay.
if you had a goal to to I don't know, to earn like $100,000 more this year than last year, right? That maybe like that's too big for you, like maybe you just wouldn't be able to do that. But you thinking in that way, sort of it forces you to ask just different questions, right? So maybe you end up earning like 60,000 more than you did, which is still a huge gain. Like it's still like it's going to make a difference to you. But if you hadn't been asking those questions, maybe you wouldn't have made any progress at all. So I see the value of asking all these big questions and sort of thinking bigger and not automatically assuming that you just can't do it, right? But I like to have sort of my head in the clouds and my feet on the ground at the same time. You know what I mean?
Big
So, you
expectations.
know, exactly right.
Shoot for the stars or shoot nothing at all.
Exactly right. Another question that I sort of ask myself sometimes, which I found useful, is like, instead of like asking, would this work? If I did this, how would I do it?
Okay.
Then once you ask how, then it's like, okay, you start looking for solutions as opposed to like, nah, that could never work, you know?
No, that's awesome. That's honestly what a lot of modern business people should take into consideration, but
Right on.
a lot of practices don't.
Fair enough.
So, continuing on, many scholars in economics believe that the government can destroy and build economies. So, for those wishing to follow your path, how can new, current private business survive in a political realm that could confiscate large portions of their wealth?
Sure. I mean, that's always going to be something like you always have to take care of these sort of existential threats to your business, right?
Mm.
Uh, a very helpful way of looking at it, something that I learned from MJ DeMarco. He's got a book with a really scammy title, but I loved it. It's one of the best business books ever. Like it's really good. I actually had him on my podcast a little while ago, and it's called The Millionaire Fast Lane by MJ DeMarco. It's really an excellent book. But again, it's like Millionaire Fast Lane, like right.
I think I saw you
Anyway,
post
so in
something
that
on
book,
that today.
I'm sorry.
I think
Oh,
I
you
saw
did?
you post something on like that today.
Oh, I don't think today, but
Oh, no, no,
maybe
no. I saw something
we
about a
talk about it
millionaire.
a lot. I've pushed that book into so many people's hands. It's like it's really good, much better than the title would imply. But anyway, he's got something that he calls the sense framework. So it basically stands for control, like the commandments, basically. So control, entry, need, time, and scale. And
Mhm.
so the commandment of control is basically you're not setting up your business in such a way that someone else can just shut you down when they feel like it, or if some sort of external market forces change. Like if the currents change and like you lose your whole business, say like Instagram, they change their whole algorithm and nobody sees my posts anymore, or there's a glitch and I lose 65,000 followers tomorrow. Like if my whole business relied on Instagram, then I'm violating the commandment of control. So
Mhm.
I'm sort of handing over my power to someone else. So I think that's like a really important thing for entrepreneurs, business people today to think about. That whole framework is really helpful. It's sort of beyond the scope of your question to go into the other elements of it, but the sense framework by MJ DeMarco is really helpful. But yeah, basically, I mean, if somebody else taking an action can destroy your whole business, then you don't really have a business, which is something that MJ told me. So
So going a little beyond the scope, I want to go a little deeper in that. What do you mean?
sure. Are you like more about
Go,
the sense?
yeah, elaborate a little more.
Sure, yeah. I won't. I have a tendency to talk more than people want to listen,
No,
but
I'm the same person, so go for
fair enough.
it.
Fair enough. Okay, so the sense framework, control, entry. That's basically like if take Amazon FBA or like drop shipping or freelancing or whatever. Like if it's something that anybody can do, then people are just going to hire anybody.
Mhm.
It goes back to differentiating yourself. How are you going to be different if anybody can do what you do? And it's a similar problem with even like people with university degrees. Like if anybody can just like get one, or like just it doesn't matter which graduate you hire, like what else is like what's going to make the difference, right? So you really sort of have to build barriers to entry. So like I've done that a little bit with what I've like how I've built my business. Like I've made a massive commitment to reading like as much as possible, just sort of like learning as much as possible, sort of building up that one side of it, and also a commitment to being like in like as excellent shape as I possibly can, right? So anybody who's going to try and compete with me in those two areas, I've already built a barrier to entry. Need, commandment of need is pretty simple. It's like if nobody needs what you're selling, like you don't have a business,
Yeah, that
right?
one's straightforward.
Exactly, right. Like this is basically like a t like a what do they call it, a t-shirt printing business. Like there are a million of them. Like it's like nobody needs another one, so like that's sort of a bad business to start. And time is an interesting one. So ideally, you wouldn't earn with your time, you'd earn with your mind, right? You have some sort of leverage. That's a whole other discussion. I'm sure like tons about leverage. But yeah, ideally you'd want to sort of not have your income tied to your time, not actually have to be there while you work. So like if you sell 1,000 copies of an online course that doesn't take you any time at all to sell additional copies, then you've freed yourself from the requirement of you actually having to be there. Whereas something like consulting, or even like being a doctor, your income is tied to your time, right? So a commandment of time. And then scale. Scale is an interesting one too. So like there are two elements to that, which is scale and magnitude. So Starbucks does scale really well. They're like they don't do much for an individual person. I mean, they give them an arguably good cup of coffee a day, right? A couple dollars, right? That's fine. But at scale, you have a billion people buying one cup of coffee. Like that's a pretty solid business model, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other side, you've got magnitude. So say go back to the doctor. So like a heart surgeon, they can't do surgeries at scale. They've got two hands, and like patient has one heart. I mean, they can't do 100 surgeries a
8 people
day.
at once.
Yeah, just like do two surgeries at once. But the magnitude of their contribution to one person's life is huge. I mean, it's literally life and death, right? So they're compensated really, really well because the magnitude of what they provide, the value that they create is really high. So those two things too. That's the sense framework, basically in a nutshell. It's really an interesting framework or prism to sort of like or lens to view your business through. And if your business satisfies all of those conditions, then you're doing pretty well.
And honestly, it sounds like you are.
I
Well,
do my best. I do my
and that's
best.
all you can do.
Exactly, right. I mean, like, I do, book reviews and stuff like that, book summaries, and there are plenty of people so like that do that. So you could say that I'm violating the commandment of entry. But there's all different things. But
But the
anyways,
several niches you fall under and all that stuff, it counters the
yeah,
violation.
I would hope so. That's the goal anyways.
Well, going off of that, so following this question, many millennials, more so even so in Gen Z, uh,
Mhm.
believe that socialism and communism are the way to go politically. So that being said, entrepreneurship thrives on survival off of capitalism. So you're doing your business well. What's your defense to those that believe that everyone should be equal?
Mhm. This is really, really interesting question. I like this a lot, and there's so much here, right? And I mean, lots of people have, get really upset
Oh yeah,
upset about the stuff, right? A lot of yelling,
a lot of
uh,
yelling.
right? And, like, I don't, I'm not a shouter. I don't yell at people, right? Um, but one thing, first off, I guess I'll say one of my biggest intellectual influences of all time is a man named Jiddu Krishnamurti. I highly recommend people just pick up his books, and he's just like one of the clearest thinking, just beautiful people that I've ever read. Anyway, he basically says like there's no system that is going to be. He basically says that every system is cancerous to the soul of the individual, right? And it's a very dangerous error. He said, like those are his words, to try and change the system without, or like while leaving the individual within that system unchanged.
Mm,
And they sort of like they work, yeah, not they're not mutually exclusive, right? I mean, you have like, they interact with each other. So all of that, all of that is to say, like, capitalism or socialism, communism, like they're all isms, and like there's going to be problems with all of them. And if you say like categorically, like this is the thing that we should do, and those other things are wrong and all terrible, I don't think that's the right answer. That being said, I think that the motives of a lot of people that support like socialism, communism are actually quite good. Like I think there's a minority of people who are just sort of like jealous or like they just hate rich people,
hmm.
right?
Yeah,
But I do think that's a minority. I think the sort of overwhelming
but they're the ones who
feeling or
get
sentiment,
shown the most.
right? Exactly. No, you've got it for sure. I think the overwhelming sentiment is that there are people that are horribly, like they're not very well off at all. They're victims of forces beyond their control. Their lives aren't going nearly as well as they could. They need our help. They need somebody's help to lift them up, right? And they've been sort of ignored by this system that sort of glorifies, billionaires and these sort of media magnates and whatever. Like a lot of people are not doing so well, and they see these people doing like exceptionally well, and I understand, absolutely that you'd see that and you think like something's wrong. And I agree with that. Like something has to change, but I don't think, you know, like what I see is that like some people are more concerned with making rich people poorer
Hmm.
than they are with making poor people richer.
Richer.
They want to bring people down as opposed to lift people up. And I
Yeah.
guess I'm always on the side of lifting people up instead, right? So yeah, like that's the part of things I would support. Where capitalism is concerned specifically, I don't think there is like there's the question of incentives that comes up a lot, and under a like communist system or socialist system, like there's no real incentive to
Hmm.
create like a company or products or technology that's going to be
True.
really useful or valuable. Like there's if it's just going to be taken from you,
What's the
and
point?
redistributed. Exactly, like why do anything, right? And so like that's one of the good parts of it. But then you've got this sort of runaway thing where like somebody can just be like have like hundreds of billions of dollars when other people have nothing, and that is what capitalism allows to happen. And I don't think that's right either. But then again, like you see, I go back and forth on
The,
this stuff all the time, and maybe I mean maybe like you can change my mind here, or not change my mind, but like help me come to a decision on this, or somebody can. There has to be some sort of like I want to say that people with a lot of money should help others.
oh
Like they
yeah.
should give some of it away. Like I think that's obvious. Like I would like if I had all that, right? I would give at least some of it away. But it's like what kind of moral claim does someone have on that individual person's money? Which I guess I struggle with. It's just like you're punishing them because they did well in life because they have a lot of money. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you have a lot of money, you owe us something that you created fair and square. I don't know. Like I know that that's why people have a lot of problems with the other viewpoint. So I guess it's complicated. Like there's no easy answer. Like
What I will
you know.
recommend, read. Lenin's thesis, uh, the April thesis that
Okay.
started the whole Russian Revolution. That is actually where the beginning of the Communism Party actually begins. Like the actual, that's the first time you hear Lenin call the Red Army the communisms. But yeah, so going a little further in time, looking at like the Great Depression and incredible economists like Milton Friedman, it goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier, where Friedman actually blames the government for the reason of the depression. So not taking preventatives or slowing the economy down instead of piling on the damage. The closest event we saw in our lifetime so far has been COVID. That being said, how would you say you adapted during this time? And if something more severe were to come, how would you adapt with the time change or
Hmm.
the economic change itself?
For sure. Yeah, another like really important like question, and it's something that people have to have an answer for ahead of time because like if you're just surprised by this, like you're gonna be worse off, right?
You're going to be doomed.
Right? And I think for me, it was a question of being okay with less, like
Mhm.
realizing that if the worst happened and if I lost everything, I would be okay. Like there's nothing that like there's almost literally nothing like short of my death and the death of everyone I care about that's gonna ruin me. Right? It's like I can always come back.
Mhm.
Right. And sort of like I actually went through this and like just the worst of the worst, like if I lost everything. No, I don't know if I could maybe I could do this again, but I could, but I could live on between like that seems low, right?
How low are you
Equivocating
thinking?
here, equivocating here, but I could live on like $500 a month. That would be a stretch, but like 750 to 1,000, like, and this would be like living on friends' couches and just like not eating like really good food, like giving up on a lot of things, selling my car, like all this sort of stuff, and not having any subscriptions, forget about Netflix. Like this is like the worst of
Right?
the worst, lose everything. But if I can live on $750,000 a month, like that's not that hard to make, like not in Canada where I live. If I can do that, then I can pretty much survive anything. And that gives you a lot of confidence because you can weather any sort of, economic or political storm that comes up, right?
Mhm.
And I think sort of knowing that about yourself gives you a lot of strength. And I think if people can sort of keep their desires in check and like say like, yeah, if the worst happened, I could be okay. Then they'd be a lot better off. And not only that, like bad times, like or like weak economies, like if you can survive in that, if you can do well in a weak economy, then you can do exceptionally well in a very strong economy. Like you learn how to sell and how to market and how to run a business in like the worst economy ever, the worst times. When things change, you're going to be like amazing.
Yeah.
You're going to be in
Yeah.
such a good spot because you're going to have all of these skills that a lot of people just won't have because they just, they just weren't able to cope with it. Right. So,
No, it's
yeah.
awesome. So, continuing off of that and off of Friedman himself, along with Anna Schwartz, he did write A Monetary History of the United States, 1867 to 1960. The two of them focus on monetary policy, and money is what matters. So, that being said, how does modern monetary policy affect the way you actually run business?
The short answer, it doesn't.
Okay.
Um, and just being brutally honest, and it sort of goes back to the commandment of control that we talked about earlier. Like if monetary policy can ruin me, then I don't really have a business,
Mhm.
right? So, like yeah, obviously I'd love for my dollars to go further. My business is basically run in American dollars. I mean, if the dollar is strong, I make a lot of money. I do really well. If sure, like that's good. But yeah, it doesn't really affect me. And you know, what I like to do, or at least like the goal, is to sort of like do so well that expenses and downturns are just irrelevant. Like just make so much money that your expenses just don't matter.
Yeah.
Like that's basically my mindset. Because like there's a limit to like how much you can cut expenses, but there's no limit, especially in the age of the internet, how much money you can make, right? So it's like working on the correct side of the equation.
Okay. Okay. So, focusing on the market system, a supply demand economies fluctuate. We know this. So technologies change, especially how businesses run. Look at you yourself. You're working pretty much off of Instagram. So
Mm.
when starting, how did you actually read the market system, get your price right, essentially, and build the business in an affordable buyer? So yeah, I know you charge what, 25 an hour for working with someone?
Oh, like personal, like
Yeah,
mentoring?
yeah, yeah.
Oh no, way more than
Way
that.
more than
Yeah.
okay, numbers have changed.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't even remember when I charged that. Yeah, like a 1 hour video call, just like this basically. Right now it's 125.
Oof,
Um, and to work with me for a whole month, it's like $600 at least,
that's not
and
bad.
more if we're getting like it's not bad, but and more if we get like really intensive.
Mhm.
Sort of like a whole bunch of like where I'm like working with you like one on one, just like sort of like building up everything, like giving my everything. It's a little bit more than that.
So yeah, how
But
did
yeah,
you
I
come
sort
to
of
that?
basically what I did basically. For one thing, it's trial and error.
Mhm.
So with respect to getting authors to pay me to share their books. I should say first off that I don't share any authors' books that I don't actually like or haven't actually read myself. So like first thing, they have to sort of meet minimum threshold of quality. I have to actually think that my audience, because I have to respect my audience as well. I can't just like take money for a book that's terrible, just
Or
right.
just push it
I
out there.
lose trust. Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, like influencer marketing is all about trust, right? So
Mhm.
like if people lose that, I always want to respect my audience and
Yeah.
not push garbage book recommendations on them, because that's an excellent way to just lose your whole business. So I sort of had to do trial and error
Mhm.
with how much I was able to charge authors, and how much other people were charging authors too, because I found that I wasn't charging nearly enough.
Really?
Other people, like other accounts, like they charge way more than I do for sponsored posts and stories and like features in like my email list or whatever. So there was that. But on the personal sort of mentoring side, which is a more or less new-ish branch of the business for me, because long story there. But basically, what I did was I kept raising my prices higher and higher until people started saying no, and then I knew that that was the ceiling.
That was the
And
that was going too
exactly
high.
right. And so like as soon as I started to sort of get pushback and like that's a little bit too much for me, like all right, that's my limit, maybe bring it back a little bit. And that only comes with pitching your offer more and more. So like if you ask like five people and they all say no, you're like, that's not really a great sample size. But if you talk to like 100 people and every single one of them says no, that's too expensive, bring it down a little bit, talk to another 100 people and like, okay, that's pretty good. You got like 40, that's okay. So
Mhm.
it's trial and error.
Always trial and error.
Yeah.
So that being said, in your style of business specifically, what market signals are you researching most?
Much of it has to do with things like search volume. There are tons of just really excellent tools now that show you exactly what people are searching for online, what they're watching, and I'm also looking at reach and engagement. Instagram's really good at that. Twitter's okay with that. My email, the platform that I use for my newsletter is really good about that. Like who's opening my emails, what they're clicking on. So I'm looking at all of that information, and that's only gotten better in the last few years. And now, I mean, you can pretty much like you can see consumer behavior for an awful lot of different markers, and it's so incredibly cool. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at where things are going, popular books, like things that show up in search trends sometimes. Yeah, things of that nature.
So going off of that, when you first started, like you didn't have all the data you have now. So what were you using then?
I actually did have quite a bit of
Oh,
data
really?
when I started. I'll say some of the potential to do it. Like like Instagram already had started to roll out some of those things, and the other things like I was able to do it, but I just didn't have enough at bats basically, or attempts. So even if like I didn't really have all like the data sort of came with making more posts
Mhm.
and seeing which ones did well and like which books people responded to, which books like people didn't care about, and even like the style of my posts change all the time. I'm always making my YouTube videos better in some way. Like for instance, I mean, it wasn't until my last video that I discovered the cinematic function on my iPhone. It makes it so much better.
Oh, it
It's
does.
like I went this entire time, right? And so I had no idea. So it's this constant sort of evolution, and I'm always looking at like what other people are doing as well, like we talked about before, and just sort of incorporating as much as I can, without like outright copying.
Awesome. I like it.
Yeah.
So, all entrepreneurs start with a dream or idea. We've already briefly discussed this previously, but so how is it that your dream or idea actually became a reality? Where did it start? How did it actually come to be?
I'm gonna I'm gonna I'm gonna take the long story and then condense it like to much much smaller. I'm gonna have some respect for people's time here. Um, I'll have to start at the very beginning and say my parents. Number one, because my business is books, basically reading, and I never ever would have learned to read as well as I did,
Mhm.
and just never have grown up to love reading as much as I do, if it wasn't for them and just what they've done for me. And they've like they helped me. Obviously, by doing things like reading to me, like when I was a little kid, always making sure I had books around. They paid for like actual like tutoring and like extra reading lessons because I started off like a little bit behind. So they've done that for me as well. And it even matters like how many words that children are exposed to when they're really young. And in I I don't know the exact numbers here, but people in like different sort of um, I guess like different socioeconomic status like households.
Mhm.
Some children they hear like millions fewer words than other children do by the same age. So like that's like millions of opportunities lost to learn new words and sort of be able to form sentences and learn how to read. And like that's a major disadvantage. So like it was my parents, like first of all, like that just made everything possible for me, which is why I love this organization called First Book. I try to raise a lot of money for them as well. I haven't raised all that much yet, but I'm really passionate about what they do. And they basically, they supply books to kids. They help them learn how to read. And there are two excellent book recommendations here for anyone who's interested. It's all about reading in the brain and like the development of reading skills. The first is Proust and the Squid by Marianne Wolf, and it's so good. It's a little heavy on the neuroscience, and I'm not a big science guy. I had to sort of slog through those parts of it, but it's really interesting. And she talks about like how people learn how to read and how they don't, and like dyslexia and what happens in the brain with dyslexic people, right? So all these reasons why people might not develop the ability to read. And she's got another book called Reader Come Home, which I loved as well. I think it was fantastic. So those two books. But then actually in Reader Come Home, I'll move on with my story
No, it's fine. Keep
in
going.
seconds. But in Reader Come Home, she mentions something really terribly sad, and it's something like in the United States, and like I live in Canada, I'm not sure like what they do here, but the Federal Bureau of Prisons, they actually take fourth grade reading statistics of kids, and they use those numbers to predict how many prison beds they're going to need in the future.
Wow.
And apparently that's a good indicator, like a reliable, like something that they found to be reliable.
I mean,
So like
when you think about
imagine
it.
that. I mean, they if like reading standards are at this level, we need this many prison beds. Like that's the
Mm.
correlation that they're working on, right? Which I found tremendously sad. So
It's
yeah, I'm
sad, but when
really
you think about it, there's actually a lot of truth to it. I mean, I
absolutely there
personally
is.
see it in my own family because like it's I can go into that whole tangent too.
Yeah. So I just like I've always felt like reading to be just exceptionally important. I'm eternally grateful to my own parents for just making it possible for me. So I had to like before my own story, like yes, I've put in a ton of work, like literally thousands of hours, probably 10,000 hours reading, like that I've done myself because of my will and like but also, like what I've done myself wouldn't even be possible without other people
Yeah.
and everyone else who was involved in helping me grow up as well. So we're all networked with everyone that we know and that we've heard about or interact with, and like how any of us would survive on our own is just like it's impossible. So like I'm like yes, I've done an awful lot on my own, but I also have a tremendous amount to be grateful for that it wouldn't have happened.
Mhm.
Um, but and I go on and on about this, but I'll try and move it faster.
It's all good.
Um,
Take your time.
right? Yeah.
I am here
So
for answers.
right. With me and reading, let's see, I started a business a long time ago as a music like a record label. It didn't do all that great. It was okay. Like I had about 12 different bands signed. A lot of them were in
Wow.
record stores. I had global distribution. I did okay, but I didn't really like it all that much. I wasn't terribly good at it. And then I had one sort of, I would say, catastrophic business failure that we won't get into, that sort of derailed my whole music career, or like whatever. But then, so I found myself working two jobs, and one of them was a job that I absolutely loved. It was a job as a bouncer, like a doorman at a bar in Canada where I live. I loved it. It's like the best part of my week. It was amazing. And nobody believes me when I when I say that, but it was a lot of fun, and like that's where I learned how to listen and just like anyway. Um, but I was even able to read an awful lot at that job because I just had books on my phone when the bar was busy, was slow. I'd just be reading. I remember on a Sunday night I read The Alchemist from like front to back because the bar was empty.
Wow.
So I didn't quite finish it by the end of my shift. But I went home. I was in my driveway finishing the last like 50 pages of The Alchemist. It was like I still remember it. But then the other job was during the week. It was overnight security at a hospital, right?
Mhm.
And parts of it were garbage. I wouldn't recommend it for a lot of reasons. The pay was shit. The like people like look down on you all the time. Like it's just like, especially like the nurses. I don't want to like throw them under the bus, but like they're just, oh man,
Not the
they're such
greatest
jerks.
people.
Right?
Most nurses aren't.
Oh man, it's like just be nice. But anyway, so there are lots of things about that job that I hated, right? But one of the things that I absolutely loved about it, I showed up to work with like a tray full of coffees and a stack of books, and it was overnight. Nothing really happened
Mhm.
very often, and on a good night, I would get like 10 hours of reading done. Like literally 10 hours of
Wow.
a 12-hour shift, just like to myself, and I'd sort of sneak off, but just go off at my own, and I just read, just from like from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. when the sun came up. I did this, 4 or 5, sometimes 6 nights a week for years, like
Wow.
years and years and years. And that allowed me to read close to 1,200 books in the last 10 years, right? So that's sort of like how I was able to do this. And when I would leave the hospital or leave whatever, and I'd go to the gym in the mornings, and when it was empty. So I'd have the gym to myself, and have the hospital to myself, just read and work out. And so I had this 10-year period of nobody knowing who I was, like anything like that. I had maybe 300, 400 Instagram followers. Like nobody, like I wasn't even trying to be known for books or anything.
Mhm.
But then I started posting more consistently, and sort of meeting other people who were doing this. Met a really good friend of mine, John Brooks. He was a big reader as well, and he was also excellent at online business. So we sort of went in together. So all these sort of things started to happen, and then just sort of got so involved in creation, being online, sharing my book recommendations, and things just sort of took off. Really in the last few years. And now where I'm at now, it's like sort of establishing like business systems, and really like I had to sort of like incorporate my business, and get like a business credit card and sort of like there's a system for this, like this is like, and this is my posting schedule, my content calendar, and like this is what I do every single day, this is who I reach out to, these are the what I have to do, like so making it a real business.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm at right now, and I'm still sort of doing that. I'm at the far end of that. I've almost sort of finished sort of you know my sort of consolidation as like a real business, but I'm just sort of coming out of that. And now, like in the next couple of years, and really for the next few decades is where it's really going to get interesting, because I've started to build up some momentum, and so I'm just like really getting going. So hopefully that wasn't like more of my story
No,
than
no,
you
no,
wanted.
no. So going a little deeper into that, what's the
Oh no.
a little deeper? What's the
Okay.
projection for, like, say, the next 5 years? What's your idea on that?
Sure. Okay, so I'm one of those weirdos that have like 100-year plan. Um,
A perfect plan, essentially.
Right, exactly. And well, one of the books I'm reading right now is called Lifespan by Tony Robbins, and it's about all these sort of like futuristic medical advances that are available now. Like people, like doctors are really doing these procedures and just like, like using stem cells to grow organs, and so like making blind people see again, and like just like opening up heart valves, and like all like this futuristic stuff, and it's happening right now,
Mhm.
and like the progress is even accelerating, right? So like even 5 years from now, 10 years from now, like you go into like a doctor's office and they just cure your whatever, like like all that stuff is coming. So I'm sort of realizing that hey, maybe I need to prepare for the eventuality that I live for a very long time.
Mhm.
So my 100-year plan is to own part of a space company.
Oh,
I
wow.
love space exploration. I want to be part of that. So basically, everything that I'm doing now is to sort of set myself up to be involved in that. I think that's where we're going. I think once we get all this like nonsense of like people shouting each other at each other and like
Just throwing rockets into the air.
exactly right, and fighting each other over stupid silly shit.
Ugh.
Think I'm an optimist, but like I think we're gonna get over that. We're gonna start listening to each other, and we're going to realize that we're all on the same human side, and I sort of want to come out on the other side of that and really be involved in like what's next. And I
Mhm.
think next is space, like exploration, getting out there and just like exploring like the goddamn galaxy, which I think is super exciting. So that's what I want to be part of. But that's like long term, like that's like super long term. And like if I don't achieve that in the next 5 decades, like that's fine. Like I'm working towards that.
You'll work it.
uh, right? 5 years, I'm still sort of like doubling down on my business. I'm spending a lot of money on sort of on growing my business and like hiring people and sort of just like stepping up my sort of output and the quality of my output. So the next step would be like hiring designers and video editors, because right now I'm doing that all by myself, which is fun. Like I enjoy it, but like I don't want to spend hours and hours of my day editing videos. I
Mhm.
want to eventually hire someone to do that. So next 5 years, I want to be much further ahead than that. And then 10 years, 15, 20, I have books that I want to write myself. um, you know uh, Podcasts, I still do a bunch of those, stuff like that. Sort of like really sort of leaning into books and education. I want to work with like, yeah, like First Book, the organization I mentioned earlier. I want to do a lot more work for them, type of stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. So, going off of what we discussed a little earlier about your competitors and building the business, um, everybody is competing, everybody is building together. So, what is it that you're doing personally in your business decision making to stay relevant, ahead of the competition, reasonably affordable, and better than everybody else?
Hmm. Yeah. Okay, so like there's a ton of competition like we talked about
Yeah.
earlier for being really, really good. I mean, the stuff that people are coming out with, and like even in my own sort of like book review niche, like there are some really, really good creators that are coming out with awesome stuff.
And there's
And
really terrible ones.
right, yeah, a lot of terrible ones. But I used to be one of those terrible ones. Like if you saw my posts from years ago, it's like not pretty, not good to look at. But like they're getting better than like once I hire a designer, like maybe they'll be even better, right? Then I don't have to do them all myself. So there's that, and I'm always like sort of progressing. But I love that there are people, like in one sense, I love that there are people out there who are doing really, really well. Because if I was just like the best and like no one had better posts than me, like everybody was like worse than me, right? Like there's no way to improve or get better. Like iron sharpens iron. So you have to
Yeah.
have like people who are ahead of you and doing better than you, or at least at your level, to sort of make any sort of progress whatsoever. But then at the same time, I balance that with being really competitive. I love competing, and like God damn it, like that was a really good post. I wish that was my post. Like I wish I was able to do that. And then sort of like compete. You're competing against them. Like there's not. Something that Gary Vaynerchuk said a long time ago, that I thought was really cool. He's like, like he says, I will compete against like everybody who in business. Like if we're competing in business, I want to like just crush you, right? Like we are enemies in business. There's nobody that I don't want to win in real life.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And it's just like I sort of feel like that too. Like we can compete, on social media to be the best and have like the most followers, the most revenue.
But
But
you're
at
not going to
the same
thrive
time,
unless you actually build off of each other.
exactly right. And like I want, I don't want them to be miserable because they're losing to me. I want everyone to have a good life, to enjoy themselves and just get something out of their business besides money,
Mhm.
right? So you know,
Awesome.
yeah,
So, a couple more things here. So, marketing strategies
sure,
have evolved significantly over the centuries. So, 19th century, we entrepreneurs had newspapers. Late 20th century, early 21st, we had the television. Now we're on to social media, which is constantly changing. So, that being
yeah.
said, how often do you consider this could change tomorrow?
Every day. Well, especially, I mean, AI. I mean, like that changes so fast, like unbelievably fast. Like I
Terrifyingly.
can't remember any time in my entire life where something's changed faster
Mm-hmm.
than AI does
Mm-hmm.
today. And like I'm not like I know next to nothing about AI. Like, it's actually a sort of a blind spot of mine. Like, I really need to focus more on sort of getting up to date as much as possible. But it's so hard because it changes so often. Like
Yeah.
week to week, like somebody will come out with some like literally revolutionary thing that changes everything about AI, and like it's impossible to keep up. And that's like just like this year.
Mm.
Give it 5 years or
Ain't
10
that the
years.
truth?
Yeah, and like same thing with like that Tony Robbins book, like the medical advances. I mean, like that's like all that stuff is happening like this year, next year, the year after. Imagine like what like they'll be able to do medically like in 30 years, right?
Yeah.
So it changes. Like all you can do is all you can do. Basically, just do your best, right? But like the worst, like we talked about before, like the worst that could happen is I lose everything. I live on $1,000 a month, right?
750 that's so much a
Right.
month.
Like if I can handle that, then maybe like it's not so bad if I miss out on something new that makes me like a that does something for me, right?
Yeah.
Like it's yeah. So
No, it's pretty straightforward. So that being said, all in all, what is, in your opinion, the best advice for the modern entrepreneur, like wanting to start a business?
mm, there's so much like there's a few things that are competing in my mind here for like best advice. Um, one thing that I think is almost like non-negotiable is building some sort of personal brand online.
Mm,
Um, it's like attention is the new oil, basically. I mean, I've heard people say that. I mean, you mentioned that before. I mean, in the 18th century or like 19th century, it was railroads.
yep.
20th, it was oil, and 21st century, it's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really have to have like an audience or like a presence on social media
I mean,
to
what is it? You're looking at the goldfish attention span. It's 9 seconds. We've gotten worse. We're at 8.25.
yeah. Yeah, it's wild. And actually, I can't help but give another book recommendation for anyone who's interested in this. Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. It's about the attention crisis, and he identifies 12 different causes of it. It's one of the better books that I read last year. And actually, there's another one I have to mention. I can't not do it. And it's called What We Owe the Future.
Mhm.
By Will MacAskill. He's a philosopher at Oxford, and it's about the long-term history of humanity. And basically, he's sort of thinking the same way that I am, except much more like sort of in depth
Mhm.
and far-reaching. So what he says basically, and this is like I'm far away from your question. I'm sorry,
It's fine. It's fine.
but he's like
We've gone
if
into attention
like
spans. So
right.
perfect example of 8.25 seconds.
Exactly, right. That's how I feel about books in general. It's like, ooh, a new book, ooh, a new
Oh,
book, new
honestly,
book,
my
right?
my to read list is insane.
It never gets any shorter.
Nope.
But anyway, what Will basically says is that like if humanity's been around for what, a couple 100,000 years, if I forget the average lifespan of the average mammalian species lasts for like 1 million years or 2 million years, right?
Hmm.
So like if even if we only last that long, this is still the early times. Like we're still early in history.
Yeah.
Like there's still potentially, like millions and millions, billions maybe. Like who knows? Like there are potentially billions of years of future history, and we would be at the very, very, very beginning of that. Like we wouldn't even be, we like on the scale of a human lifetime, we'd still be infants, compared to like the full history of humanity, right? So that book is about that, and it's about the existential threats that we face now, and like how we can sort of overcome them, and like what it means, like why we should. Anyway, really good. And I lost track of the question. Right, advice,
Your vice.
advice. Right. All right. My best advice is to learn how to focus on one question at a time. All
It's a
right.
good answer.
All right. Uh, okay, so obviously I'm going to say read a lot, read widely,
Mhm.
read books that people like of different perspectives than yours, different life histories. Like there's something that you can learn from everybody. Like I've read like all sorts of books. The Bhagavad Gita is one of my favorite books of all time. The Tao Te Ching, I love that. I mentioned Krishnamurti. Who else? I mean, I got the Russian novelists, Tolstoy,
Yep.
Dostoevsky,
Yep.
all those guys.
Classics.
Albert Camus is big for me. There's another French woman, Simone Weil. She's been like extraordinarily impactful for me. But then you've got like African literature. I'm sort of light on that. But I did really enjoy Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, or a whole bunch of like just also like books everywhere from all corners of the earth and from all times and places and people. Just really, really cool. That's like what I would recommend. And lastly, I would say treat treat your body and your mind, like take care of yourself like an Olympic athlete, and just like really like you have one body, one mind. Like everything that you ever experience or feel or think, like it's going to take place in your mind,
Hmm.
and you really have to take care of that, and just sort of protect your mental health, and and your emotions, and make sure like the inputs that you're getting, like the people you surround yourself with, the foods that you eat, the amount of physical activity that you get every single day, it all feeds into each other, and like you're investing in yourself, and think of how like seriously an Olympic athlete would take that, and like how much effort that they would put into taking care of like their vehicle for like what they want to achieve. And yeah, like that's just like non-negotiable as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. Excellent.
So
Well, that
took me a
is
long
all
time to
I.
answer that.
No, no. Honestly, the longer the answers, I love them. Like the more in
Right.
depth you've got it. But that is pretty much all I've got. So before I let you go, Matt, any final thoughts, comments, book recommendations you got?
Oh, man. uh we covered a
We
lot.
covered a
I mean, I
lot.
could go into book recommendations. Geez, I'll just like this has nothing to do with anything. Just this is just one of the books that I loved this year, which is The Count of Monte Cristo by
Oh
Alexander
my
Dumas.
God, I love that one. Yeah, that's a good
Right,
one.
you've read that too.
That's
I
a good
love
one.
it, man. How good is that? It's
Yeah.
amazing, right? It's one of my favorite books of all time. It gave me like the biggest book hangover that I can remember. It's just like you think about it for like weeks afterwards. I loved it.
Matt, thank you so much for joining me and doing this. This has been awesome.
To do something great, sacrifice is a part of it. It's just the start of it. You can't start and quit. You have to harness this, cause energy is bliss. And when I swing, I miss, but then I swing and hit. So I'ma swing again and I'ma swing again.